My dad left me his house and his will, and now my family is trying to ruin my life. I never thought my life would unravel the way it did. Everything was going fine, or at least as fine as life can be. I was just an ordinary guy working a steady job at a local accounting firm, living in a modest apartment and enjoying a routine that gave me a sense of control. Then, one rainy night, my phone rang. The call that came shattered everything. My dad had been in a car accident. A drunk driver had run a red light, crashing into his car, and my dad didn't make it. Dad and I were close, incredibly close. He was my hero, my mentor, and my best friend all rolled into one. My mom had died when I was just a baby, so Dad raised me by himself. I didn't have memories of her, only stories Dad would share when he was feeling nostalgic, usually after a couple of beers on a quiet night. He'd tell me about her laugh, her kindness, and how they fell in love when they were barely more than teenagers. He would always end those stories with a deep sigh, as if trying to exhale the pain that never really left him. Growing up, it was just the two of us against the world. Dad wasn't the kind of father who showed his love with grand gestures. He wasn't wealthy or particularly expressive with words. But he was always there. He worked hard as a mechanic, running his own small shop where he'd fix up cars during the day and come home with grease-stained hands. I'd sit with him at the kitchen table, or he'd try to help me with my homework, even if he was exhausted. And on weekends, we'd go fishing at the lake or watch old movies, anything that let us spend time together. The house was our sanctuary. It wasn't anything fancy, just a two-story house with faded paint, creaky floors, and a garage that doubled as Dad's workshop. But to me, it was everything. Every corner of that house was filled with memories, the nights we'd stay up late playing cards, the times he taught me how to fix things around the house, and the sound of his favorite records playing from the living room as he cooked us dinner. Dad was tough but kind. He didn't have much, but he'd always give what he could. He taught me how to be resourceful, how to work hard, and most importantly, how to be a good person. One of my earliest memories is of him teaching me how to change the oil in his old pickup truck. I was probably 7 or 8, struggling to hold the wrench with my small hands. Dad just laughed, kneeling beside me in the driveway, showing me how to do it with the patience of a man who had all the time in the world. "See, Chris, it's all about leverage," he said, his voice calm and steady. "You might not have the strength yet, but if you work smart, you don't need it." Those moments were simple, but they meant everything to me. Dad wasn't just teaching me about cars, he was teaching me about life. He was my role model, showing me that you didn't need much to be happy, just a little hard work, some honesty, and a good heart. As I got older, our bond grew even stronger. I'd help him out at the shop whenever I could, learning the ropes and earning a few extra bucks. He'd always say that I was better with numbers than with a wrench, joking that maybe one day I'd end up running the business side of things. But he was proud of me no matter what. When I told him I wanted to go to college to study accounting, he didn't bat an eye. He just patted me on the back and said, "You go make something of yourself, kid. I'll be cheering you on." And he did. He cheered me on through every success, every failure, and every little moment in between. When I graduated college, he was right there in the crowd, clapping louder than anyone else. He made me feel like I could do anything, even if the rest of the world thought otherwise. He was my constant, the one person who never wavered in his support. When Dad died, I felt like my whole world had been ripped apart. I went through the motions of planning the funeral, accepting condolences from distant relatives who I barely knew, and trying to keep it together. But inside, I was falling apart. Every day felt like an uphill battle just to get out of bed, to go to work, and to keep pretending like I was okay. I wasn't okay. I'd lost the most important person in my life, and nothing could fill that void. After the funeral, I learned that Dad had left me the house in his will. He'd always said he wanted me to have it, but seeing it in writing made it feel so final, like he'd prepared for this moment even though I hadn't. He didn't have much else to leave behind, just a modest savings account, his shop tools, and his beloved 1967 Mustang that he'd been restoring for years. But the house was everything. It was the last piece of him I had left, a tangible reminder of all the memories we'd shared. When the lawyer read out Dad's will, it was a straightforward affair. Everything went to me, as Dad had made clear in his wishes. But my Uncle Mark's face twisted in displeasure the moment he heard it. Mark, Dad's older brother, had always been a thorn in our side. He'd pop up at family events with his wife Linda and their 2 kids, always full of criticisms about how Dad lived his life. To them, Dad was the black sheep of the family, the underachiever who never quite lived up to their lofty standards. "That's it?" Mark said, his voice dripping with disdain as he looked at the lawyer. "He just left everything to Chris? What about the rest of us?" The lawyer, a no-nonsense woman with a stern expression, calmly explained that Dad's wishes were clear and legally binding. Mark grumbled, shaking his head, but he didn't press further. He didn't have to, the look on his face said it all. The resentment was palpable, and I knew it was only a matter of time before it boiled over. After the reading, Mark and Linda left in a huff, dragging their kids behind them. I could feel the tension in the air, like a storm brewing on the horizon. I thought maybe they'd just let it go, that they'd realize Dad's decision was his alone and respect it. But I was wrong. The first few weeks after Dad's death were an emotional blur. I was trying to navigate my grief, sort through his belongings, and figure out what to do with the house. The place was filled with memories, and every room held a piece of him. His tools were still scattered in the garage, his favorite books lined the shelves in the living room, and his old recliner, worn and comfortable, still sat by the window where he'd spent so many evenings reading the newspaper. As I started going through his things, I found little reminders of our time together. There was an old photo of us from a fishing trip we took when I was 12, both of us smiling proudly with our catch of the day. I found the birthday cards I'd made him as a kid, all crumpled and faded but carefully saved in a drawer. And then there was the letter he wrote me when I went off to college, telling me how proud he was and how he knew I'd make something of myself. I read that letter over and over, trying to hold on to his words, trying to keep him close. But while I was wrapped up in memories, the rest of the family was gearing up for a different kind of fight. Mark and Linda didn't waste any time making their displeasure known. It started subtly at first, awkward silences at family gatherings, side-eye glances that lingered too long. But soon, the whispers began, and it wasn't long before I was hearing about them from everyone I knew. The first person to tip me off was an old family friend, Mrs. Jacobs, who'd known my dad since they were kids. She pulled me aside at the grocery store one day, her face full of concern. "Chris, I don't know how to say this, but I've been hearing some things, nasty things. Mark's been telling people you took advantage of your dad before he died." I stared at her, dumbfounded. "What? That's not true. Dad left me the house because he wanted me to have it." Mrs. Jacobs nodded sympathetically. "I know, sweetheart. I know how close you two were. But Mark's telling folks you manipulated your dad, that you pressured him into cutting them out of the will." The accusation stung. Manipulated? Pressured? Dad and I had been more than just father and son, we were a team. He'd made his own decisions, and the idea that I'd coerced him was not only false but deeply hurtful. But the rumors didn't stop there. They spread like wildfire, fueled by Mark and Linda's bitterness. It seemed like everywhere I went, people were whispering behind my back. I'd walk into the hardware store, and suddenly, conversations would quiet. Neighbors who'd once waved and smiled now looked at me with thinly veiled suspicion. Even my co-workers were acting differently, and I'd catch them exchanging awkward glances whenever I entered the break room. One afternoon, I was at the bank sorting out some paperwork when the teller, a woman I'd known for years, gave me a pitiful look. "I'm sorry about your dad," she said softly, handing me back my documents. "And I'm sorry about everything you're dealing with. People can be so cruel." I nodded, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. It was clear she'd heard the rumors too. I thanked her, but as I left, the anger bubbled up inside me. I was tired of the lies, tired of the sideways looks, and tired of feeling like a villain in a story that wasn't mine. It wasn't just strangers and acquaintances, even people who'd known Dad were starting to believe the lies. Mark and Linda were relentless, telling anyone who'd listen that I'd taken advantage of Dad's old age and fragile state to get the house. They'd paint themselves as the victims, the loving family members who'd been wronged by the scheming son. One Sunday, I ran into my cousin Jenny at a coffee shop. We'd never been close, but we'd grown up together, and I thought there might be some sense of family loyalty there. But as soon as she saw me, she approached with a look of contempt. "So, Chris, how's it feel living in that big house all by yourself?" she asked, her voice laced with sarcasm. "Must be nice to get everything handed to you on a silver platter." I clenched my jaw, fighting the urge to lash out. "Jenny, you know that's not true. I didn't get anything. Dad left me the house because he wanted me to have it." She rolled her eyes, crossing her arms. "Yeah, that's what you keep saying. But everyone knows you always had him wrapped around your finger. I mean, it's not like you ever really had to work for anything, right?" The words cut deep. Jenny didn't know anything about my relationship with Dad or how hard I'd worked to support myself and honor his legacy. But her attitude was a reflection of the toxic narrative Mark and Linda were spreading, and it was clear that nothing I said would change her mind. I left the coffee shop feeling more alone than ever, the weight of the false accusations pressing down on me like a boulder. At work, things were no better. I noticed my co-workers whispering whenever I walked by, and one day, my boss called me into his office. He was a no-nonsense kind of guy, but even he looked uncomfortable as he gestured for me to sit down. "Chris, I'm not one to get involved in personal matters, but I've been hearing some things," he began, choosing his words carefully. "There's talk going around about your dad's estate. People are saying you might have, I don't know, taken advantage of the situation." My heart sank. "Those are just rumors. I didn't do anything wrong." He nodded, but his expression was uncertain. "I believe you, but it's affecting the atmosphere here. I just want to make sure you're okay." I left his office feeling humiliated. The lies had spread so far that even my professional reputation was being tarnished. I felt like I was constantly defending myself, trying to prove that I wasn't the greedy, manipulative person Mark and Linda were making me out to be. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling of my childhood bedroom, replaying conversations in my head and wishing I could somehow set the record straight. I thought about Dad and everything he'd taught me about being strong, about standing up for what's right, but I didn't know how to fight back against something so insidious. The house, which had once been my sanctuary, now felt like a battleground, a constant reminder of the turmoil my family had stirred up. The situation finally came to a head when Mark and Linda showed up unannounced at the house one rainy Saturday afternoon. I was in the garage, going through some of Dad's old tools, when I heard the doorbell ring. I opened the door to find them standing on the porch, drenched but defiant. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice laced with frustration. I wasn't in the mood for another confrontation, but it seemed like they were determined to drag this out. Mark crossed his arms, his face twisted in anger. "We need to talk, Chris. This whole situation is bullshit, and you know it." I stepped aside, letting them in, though every instinct told me to slam the door in their faces. They walked into the living room, looking around like they were taking inventory of everything Dad had left behind. The disdain on their faces was unmistakable, and it made my blood boil. "This house should have been ours," Linda said, her voice cold and sharp. "Your dad promised Mark that he'd leave it to him, and now you're just sitting here like you deserve it." I stared at her, stunned by the audacity. "Dad never promised you anything. He left the house to me because he wanted me to have it. This was his decision, not mine." Mark stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "You manipulated him, Chris. We all know it. You've been pulling the strings for years, acting like the perfect son while the rest of us were just trying to get by. You used him, and you know it." I could feel my hands trembling with rage. I'd spent my entire life trying to be the best son I could be, taking care of Dad when he needed it, and they were twisting that into something ugly. "I loves Dad," I said, my voice breaking. "I didn't manipulate him. I was there for him because he was my father. You were the ones who were never around unless you needed something." Linda rolled her eyes, dismissing me with a wave of her hand. "You think you're so righteous, don't you? You've got everyone fooled, but we know the truth. And we're not going to let you get away with it." They left, slamming the door behind them, and I stood in the living room, my chest heaving with frustration. I was done being their scapegoat, done letting their lies go unchallenged. I knew I couldn't just sit back and let them ruin my name. I decided it was time to fight back. I reached out to the lawyer who had handled Dad's will, explaining everything that was going on. She was sympathetic but firm. Dad's will was airtight, and there was no legal basis for Mark and Linda's claims. She assured me that I had nothing to worry about on that front, but the damage to my reputation was already being done. I started documenting everything, pulling together photos, letters, and any evidence I could find that showed my relationship with Dad. I spoke to some of his old friends, gathering testimonials from people who knew how close we'd been. I wanted to be prepared, just in case things got worse. Meanwhile, Emily was my rock. She'd seen firsthand the toll this was taking on me, and she was determined to help. "They're jealous," she said one night as we sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by boxes of Dad's old belongings. "They can't stand the fact that you were the one Dad trusted, that you were the one who was there for him." Emily wasn't afraid to speak her mind, and having her in my corner gave me the strength to keep fighting. She started reaching out to people in the community, setting the record straight whenever she heard the rumors being repeated. She didn't shy away from confrontation, and I was grateful to have someone who believed in me when it felt like the whole world was against me. Still, it felt like an uphill battle. No matter how much evidence I gathered, no matter how many people I talked to, the whispers continued. I'd catch people glancing at me in the grocery store, neighbors who used to be friendly now keeping their distance. It was exhausting, and there were days when I didn't even want to leave the house. But I knew I couldn't give up. I had to defend Dad's legacy and my own integrity, no matter how hard it got. The house was more than just a building, it was a symbol of everything Dad and I had built together, and I wasn't going to let Mark and Linda's lies destroy that. Update 1, 2 months later. Opie, my family is spreading lies about me after I inherited my dad's house. Hey, Reddit. I don't really know where else to turn, so I thought I'd share my story here. My dad passed away in a car accident a couple of months ago, and he left me his house in his will. My dad and I were incredibly close. He raised me on his own after my mom died, and this house was our home. He always said he wanted me to have it when he was gone. But ever since the will was read, my dad's side of the family has been making my life hell. They're spreading rumors that I manipulated my dad into leaving me everything, and they're telling anyone who'll listen that I took advantage of him. My uncle and his wife even showed up at the house, accusing me of stealing what was rightfully theirs. I'm at my wit's end. I've tried to set the record straight, but it feels like the rumors just keep spreading. I just want to grieve my dad in peace, but my family won't let me. What can I do to stop them? Any advice would be appreciated. Top comment. Wow, Opie, I'm so sorry you're dealing with this. It sounds like your family is acting out of pure jealousy and entitlement. It's clear that your dad wanted you to have the house, and their behavior is completely unjustified. If they're spreading false information, consider speaking to a lawyer about potential defamation. Document everything and try to distance yourself from them as much as possible. You deserve to grieve without all this added drama. Opie's response. Thank you so much for your support. I've already spoken to my lawyer, and she said there's no legal ground for their claims, but it's the damage to my reputation that's hurting the most. I'm trying to keep a record of everything, but it's exhausting. Emily's been a huge help, but it's hard not to let it get to me. I just wish they'd let it go and move on, but I'm starting to realize that might never happen. Things got worse before they got better. A few weeks after my Reddit post, I got a call from one of Dad's old friends, Mr. Thompson. He'd known my dad for decades and was one of the few people who'd been like family to us. When I picked up the phone, his voice was filled with concern. "Chris, I thought you should know, I heard Mark at the diner this morning, talking about you. He's telling people you stole from your dad before he died, that you pressured him into changing the will. It's all lies, but he's really going around spreading it." Hearing that made my blood boil. It was bad enough that they were spreading rumors, but now they were twisting my relationship with Dad into something ugly. I couldn't let it go on any longer. That evening, Emily and I sat down and came up with a plan. If Mark and Linda wanted to play dirty, I was going to show them I wasn't afraid to stand up for myself. The next day, I took all the evidence I'd gathered and went to the local community center, where Mark and Linda often attended meetings. I walked into the room where they were sitting with a group of mutual acquaintances and laid everything out on the table, photos of me and Dad, letters he'd written, and proof that the will was legitimate. Mark's face turned beet red as I spoke, laying bare the truth they'd been trying so hard to distort. "You've been spreading lies about me, about Dad, and I'm here to set the record straight. This is the truth, and I'm done letting you slander me because you didn't get what you wanted." Linda tried to interrupt, but I cut her off. "You can hate me all you want, but you don't get to rewrite history. I took care of Dad because I loved him, not because I wanted anything from him. And if you keep spreading these lies, I'll take legal action. I'm done being your punching bag." The room fell silent. People stared at Mark and Linda, waiting for them to respond, but they had nothing to say. For the first time, it felt like the power had shifted, and they were finally being held accountable for the damage they'd caused. After that confrontation, the rumors began to die down. Mark and Linda stopped showing up at the usual places, and I heard less and less about their false accusations. It wasn't an overnight victory, but it was a start, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. Update 2, 6 months later. Opie, I exposed my family's lies about my inheritance, and now they're finally backing off. Hey everyone, I wanted to update those who followed my story. After months of dealing with my family's false accusations and relentless rumors, I finally decided to confront them publicly. I walked into a meeting where they were spreading lies about me and laid out all the evidence, proof that my dad left me the house because he wanted me to have it, and not because I manipulated him. Mark and Linda were caught completely off guard and had nothing to say in their defense. Since then, the rumors have mostly died down, and they've stayed away from me. I'm not sure if they'll ever fully let it go, but at least now they know I won't tolerate their lies. It's been hard, but I'm finally starting to feel at peace. I miss my dad every day, but knowing that I've honored his wishes gives me some comfort. Thank you to everyone who offered advice and support. You helped me find the strength to stand up for myself when I needed it most. Top comment. I'm so glad to hear you stood up to them, OP. It sounds like you handled this in the best possible way, and I hope they finally learned their lesson. You deserve to enjoy your inheritance without all the drama and lies. Stay strong, and keep doing what you're doing. Your dad would be proud. OP's response. Thank you. It's been a tough road, but I'm glad I finally stood up for myself. I know my dad would have wanted me to protect what he worked so hard for, and that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm grateful for the support from people like you. It's helped me more than you know. With the rumors finally starting to fade, I began to focus on what really mattered, preserving Dad's legacy and building a future that honored the sacrifices he'd made for me. Emily and I decided to turn the house into something more than just a home. We wanted it to be a place that reflected who Dad was and what he meant to us. We transformed the garage into a workshop, restoring old cars just like Dad used to. It was therapeutic, bringing new life to rusty old machines, and every time I picked up a wrench, I felt a little closer to him. Emily started using her design skills to help me restore the Mustang Dad had left behind, turning it into a project we could work on together. The house, once a symbol of loss and conflict, became a space of healing and creativity. We hosted small gatherings with friends, shared stories of Dad, and found new ways to keep his spirit alive. The pain of his absence never fully went away, but the love he'd left behind was stronger than any of the bitterness that had tried to overshadow it. Mark and Linda stayed out of our lives after the public confrontation. I'd occasionally see them around town, but they never approached me again. It was as if they'd finally realized that their anger wasn't going to get them what they wanted. I'd won, not by fighting dirty, but by standing firm and refusing to let their lies dictate my life. As the months turned into years, I found myself letting go of the anger I'd held toward them. I didn't forgive them, not entirely, but I didn't let them occupy my thoughts anymore. I had more important things to focus on: my marriage, my work, and the future Emily and I were building together. One evening, as Emily and I sat on the back porch, watching the sunset over the house that had once been my childhood home, she turned to me and smiled. "You did it, you know," she said softly. "You took everything they threw at you and came out stronger." I nodded, feeling a sense of peace that had been missing for so long. "I did, didn't I? And I couldn't have done it without you." We sat there in silence, hand in hand, as the sky turned shades of pink and orange. I thought of Dad and all the lessons he'd taught me about resilience, love, and standing up for what's right. I knew he'd be proud of the man I'd become and the life I was creating in his honor. In the end, the house was more than just an inheritance, it was a testament to the bond between a father and son, and the strength to overcome whatever life threw our way. I'd fought for it, defended it, and made it my own. And in doing so, I'd found a way to carry Dad with me, every step of the way.